Before we start, I would like to greet those persons who have been in my inventory class before. There are a number of you here. But you know what? There are some of you who have been in more than once, twice. I even have somebody who's here for the third time. Now, do you think that means people fail inventory? You really can't fail my class. There's no right or wrong, no good or bad. Inventory is a process. And I'm going to keep saying certain things, and I'm doing that for a reason. Inventory really is a process that you learn to do, and you never stop doing. And when people come back, it's because they're dead serious about getting in touch with more and more and more of what's going on in them. So I welcome you and I salute you. I really honor the spirit of those people who work so hard at changing. Okay. Welcome to Personal Inventory. This is the first in a series of 4 classes designed to help you use the inventory process to unlock your past and open the door to a better future. I'm reminded of the story of a prisoner. He cried out, proclaiming his innocence. He didn't do it. It wasn't fair. And the whole time he was being dragged and pulled and thrown into the cell. And over he watched as the guards let somebody else through the hallways and set them free. And time went on, and it seemed like an eternity. And one day as the guard passed by, he cried out, "Stop, wait. I've been counting the days, the years. It's 20 years. Come, open the doors and let me out." And the guard said, "They have never been locked." And that is so much like you and like I, who have lived lives of self-imposed imprisonment. I have been a prisoner of my fears. I have been a prisoner of my self-doubts, of my anxieties, of my own self-imposed limitations. It was a prison of my own making, and I kept waiting for somebody else to come and to let me out, to set me free, to show me what to do, when all the time the answers were right inside of me. The freedom was available in here, in changing my perceptions, in changing my thinking, in developing a system in which I could look inside and see what was going on inside of me. How many times you have felt, too, that you have been imprisoned. Here at the Church of Today, there is a system that's called the transforming system. Those of you who came to Michael Wickett's class, you saw what goal achieving could do in your lives. Goal achieving is a part of our transforming system. Goal setting and goal achieving. Mastermind groups are very popular in this church. People come together in prayer groups. There is a set of steps that they follow that, when used, make dramatic results in people's lives. This, too, is a part of our transforming system. And then there are affirmations. Classes are being taught all the time, teaching us to change the negative words we are saying and replace them with the positive. And in doing this, too, can help us to move ahead, to change our lives. And the fourth is an image book. And again, classes are constantly being taught on how to put together, with pictures and words, a book that tells a story of the life we would like to be living. All of these extremely effective tools. But as in any system, we need to put the tools together and work them together. You know, so often, have you found that you've set a goal, and a month or two later you find something's not happening. Why am I not attaining that goal? My intentions are so good, but why can't I seem to move beyond a certain point? Or I get so far in attaining my goal, and then I seem to slip back again. And this is where the fifth part of the transforming system has been so helpful. And that is the personal inventory. You see, we can have grand ideas, big dreams, but unless we can really get down into the place where we live from, we won't attain our goals. We won't achieve what we set out to do. I don't know how many of you have found this to be true, but have you found that for periods of time you read and you listen to tapes and you listen to speakers and you come to classes, and somehow you're still not moving through and doing what you want to do, and then you say, well, I don't think so. I don't think that system works. Well, there's a key. See, we don't live from our intellect. We could gain all of the wisdom and knowledge of the scholars and the positive thinkers in our head and get so excited and have the best of intentions. But you know where you live from? Down here, where you feel. In your gut. That's where we live from. It's like a magnet that is attracting to us all the time, our experiences in life. And for me, the smarter my head got, and the more I could not get in touch with what was going on in my feelings, I was being pulled and pulled and pulled until I thought it was going to snap. You know that feeling? You've got all the answers. You know you're right. Why isn't it working? And that's when I had to take a look at what went on in my feelings. And so often, most of us have not learned to even identify what goes on here. About 13 years ago, I was divorced. I was raising 3 young boys, moved into low-income housing. And the first job I ever had was cleaning houses. That was the prison I had made for myself. I had a belief system that said, who would hire you? What can you do? You know how to clean houses. You can do that for a living. And yet, I didn't want to do that forever. It was fine for a period of time. But I knew I wanted more than that. And I used to pray in the middle of the night. I used to wake up, and I'm sure some of you know the feeling and the anxiety, and I would just start to pray and say, God, show me. There's more to life than this. I know there is. I can remember as a young teenager laying in bed and staring at the ceiling, and I used to ask myself questions like, why was I born? Did you ask yourself that at some point? Some of you did. Why am I here? Why is anybody here, and where do we all go when this is done? And do we just go to bed at night to wake up in the morning, have our breakfast, go to school or to work, come home, do our chores, eat our meals, go back to bed only to wake up and do it all over again? And do we do this forever? Is that all there is? Do you remember that song? Is that all there is? Then let's keep dancing. Bring out the booze, and I'm sure there were lots of glasses that were lifted to that song in many bars across the country. Because people do feel that. Is that all there is to life? There has to be more than this. And so in those early times, many years ago, I would pray and say, God, show me. Show me there's more than that. And you know, if we really listen, God answers prayers. And when I say God, see, the concept of God 13 years ago is certainly different than the one I have today. But you know what? Didn't matter to him. It really didn't, because God answers the sincerity of our prayers. He responds to our sincerity, not our words. And in sincerity, I ask, show me. Show me there's more. And it happened in the strangest way. And I'm telling you this so that you can learn to look at your life through different eyes than you've always looked. Start looking for the ways that you are being answered in your life. I remember making a decision to go back to school because I wanted to do more with my life. And I took a class. The first class at the junior college was adolescent psychology. Little instructor, looked like she had taught forever. And the first thing she told us to do, the first day of class, she said, I want you to write a paper on your own adolescence. And then she said the strangest thing. She said, nobody will ever see this paper except me. So I want you to be totally honest. What was it like? How did you feel about yourself? How did you relate to your parents? How did they feel about you? How did you get along with your peer group? And in those days, I really wasn't a big talker. I was a quiet person, a thinker. I was always thinking. So I did not talk about my feelings to people. And you know what happens when we only think about things? They go around and around and around and around, and they never get resolved. They just go around. And that night, I picked up a pen, and she had done me the greatest gift, the greatest service that anybody had given me up to that point. She taught me a system of writing, pouring out my feelings on paper. And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and very honestly, to this day, I don't know what she was looking for on that paper. I really don't. But you know what I got out of it? I saw the patterning of my parenting. I was not very original at all. Everything I was doing with my sons, my parents had done with me. And I said I wouldn't. You know, do you know the feeling of saying, I'll never do what they did? And then when you take a good look and you find out you're doing it too, well, you change just enough to fool yourself, to think you're doing it a little differently. But as I wrote, I saw I had just been following what was done with me and doing the same thing. And I went on to my next class, sociology, and the professor had us write a paper. It was on 3 generations in society and how it had changed. But then he wanted 3 generations of our family and how it had changed. And how did the two compare? I thought that was fascinating. I wrote and I wrote and I asked a lot of questions. And as I wrote, I thought, society changes. They move and they grow and they develop in society. And I looked at my home. I was living in the home that my parents grew up in, my father grew up in, and that his father moved into when he came from Europe. My mother had lived down the street, and her parents were still living there. This was a 3rd generation still on the same block in the same home. And I looked at that, and I thought, no wonder I have such a difficult time with change, with adapting to new situations. I had not learned, that's all. You do automatically what you learn. I had not learned about the excitement, the challenge of change. To me, it was fearful, frightening, made me decide to not do many things in my life if I had to move out of my comfort zones in the least. And there I was, in my prison, that would not allow me to move beyond what was comfortable to me. When I think about it, I thought everybody was Catholic. Didn't everybody go to parochial school for 13 years, counting kindergarten? I didn't know anything else. I didn't know anybody else. And when it came to dating, didn't you all marry your own nationality? Well, I didn't. And I remember how that was. You know, it was okay. But when I asked my grandmother, she just kind of shrugged, because my mother would not have been allowed to marry out of her nationality. And she said, well, he's nice to you. And that was that. But I saw how confining, how constricting. And yet, as I moved distance-wise away, do you know what happened? Nothing. I carried the same concepts, the same feelings, the attitudes, the ideas with me that I had developed in this setting over the years. Now, I can remember something that was said to me as a teenager. I was 16 and I was going for a job. And I was walking with a friend, and the whole way there, I told her every reason we wouldn't get the job. And finally she said, Lenore, you are so negative. And I wasn't sure what that meant, except that the way she said it didn't sound like it was a compliment. And so I just stopped, and I didn't say any more. I didn't want to tell her I had just been told that at home. And the next time that I was setting out to do something, and my father started to list all the ways that it couldn't possibly work out for me, I turned around and I said, why do you do that to me? Why do you tell me all these reasons why things don't work out or won't work out? And he looked so hurt and so stunned. And he said, well, I just don't want you to be disappointed. Do you see? His perceptions, my perceptions, the reality. He did not want me to be hurt. He did not want me to go into life and be disappointed. But you know what I learned? See, pretty soon I didn't need him to tell me anymore. I had my own voice in here. And everything I set out to do, this voice told me, you can't do that. Who'd hire you? What can you offer? Who do you think you are to tell them anything? My own voice took over. But and I bet I was 7 years ago on a job. It was about 6-7 years ago. And I remember we were brainstorming. And all the ideas were just supposed to be thrown on the table. And somehow I started to feel very frustrated with this. And as everybody talked, I had the answer why it wouldn't work. Boy, was I sharp that day. And all of a sudden my boss said, Lenore. And I heard myself. All those years had gone by. And my tape was still going of why it wouldn't work. Our tapes are so strong. You know, that's what they are. They're tapes that we have learned. And in a class like personal inventory, we learn to take a look at those tapes. And it's just like our little tape recorders at home that we put the cartridge in, we take it out. Well, we learn to get in here, to see what's going on, to get in our feelings, to see what's going on, and pull out the old tape and replace it with a new one. But somewhere along the line, we've got to look. We've got to see what's going on in there. When I came to this church, and it was in that period of time that I found my way here through a lady friend that I met where I lived. She had as many, if not more, problems than I did. But you know what? She used to smile. She didn't have big frown lines all over her. She didn't have a mouth that was down here all the time. She smiled a lot, and she was happy. And she had an optimistic attitude. And you know, Anita never had to convince me to come here and see what this was about. All I had to do was experience her, and I wanted to find out more about this place that she came to. And that's how I came here, and one of the first classes I attended was Karen Boland's class on woman awareness. And there is a series of tapes available here on those classes, and again, it's for men too. And in that class, she told a story about a father physically abusing his daughter as she was growing up. And I sat right in front, and I cried. And I tried to stop, but I couldn't. You know how sometimes you think a faucet gets turned on and it just keeps coming down the cheeks? And I sat there and I just couldn't turn it off. And finally I had to get up and I walked out of the class. And the next day I called her and I said, Karen, I said, my father never did that to me, but I couldn't stop crying. And I remembered Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has said, we really don't cry for other people. We cry for our own unresolved pain. I said, what's going on in me? And she said, well, I'm not sure, but you can write. And so she had me write about my relationships with men, starting with my father, my uncles, neighbors, ex-husband, whoever, any significant others in my life. And not what I thought about the relationship, but what were my feelings in those relationships. And you know, as I wrote that, I really had gotten in touch with the idea of being honest with my feelings as much as I was capable of being. And as I wrote, I really saw that there were some unresolved hurts, pain, rejection, that I had never dealt with, and I still didn't know how to deal with. And so I made a decision. See, that was an inventory. But inventory just doesn't mean you look at it and it goes away. You write it out and it's finished. It's, now what do I do with it? And in that case, I really felt I needed some counseling. And so I went for a few sessions, and I got it straightened out in my mind, what really went on, how it really was, and worked through my hurts. See, we don't get rid of our hurts by walking around them or covering them up and pretending they don't exist, ignoring them. We walk through them by letting ourselves experience the pain, talk it out, write it out, and then become free of it. And that was a choice I made, and that may be a choice one of you may make when you start really delving and seeing that there are some things that are unresolved, but you want to get some help. In the church today, something we didn't have so many years ago was the support group systems we have today. They are here for our benefit, for our help, and to help us walk through those unresolved feelings from the past. I had learned a treasure in writing. I even used to write. I remember when I have 3 sons, and my oldest son, at that time, you know, when they're getting to be teenagers and they're getting to be bigger than you, and there are just little conflicts you have. And what I started to do was to write. I used to write out, he said, I said, he said, I said, right through the argument. And the next day I'd leave for work, and it seemed like something again would get started between us, and I'd get to work and I'd write, he did, I said, he did, I said. And I did this for several times. And do you know what I discovered? I discovered what my buttons were that he knew how to push. See, it took me longer to discover them than it did him. But once I knew, I didn't have to buy into that anymore. And not only that, I saw my part. I saw how I used to pull rank on him, and it used to frustrate him. So on it went, back and forth. But when I saw my part, I could change it. There is great value in writing, so much so that this article appeared in Self magazine just a couple of months ago, and it said, writing your way to better health. This is a study done by Dr. James Pennebaker, Associate Professor of Psychology at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. He took 2 groups of college students. 25 of them, he told that for 4 days he wanted them to write for 20 minutes per day on trivia, nothing. The other 25 students, he said he wanted to write for 4 days, 20 minutes a day, on something that was going on in their life, something that was bothering them. And he found that pouring out your feelings about traumatic experiences on paper actually improved the efficiency of their immune systems. Students who wrote about experiences that weighed heavily on them showed an increase in lymphocyte response, which indicates an enhanced ability to fight infection. By contrast, those who just wrote on trivia, there was no change going on in their system. And then when they checked to see how long this would last, you know, these effects, how long would they stay in their system? And they found that the soul-searching students, it was still evident 6 weeks later that this change was going on in their immune system, and that 6 months later when they contacted them, they had fewer doctor appointments than the other group did. So he and his colleagues decided that people who wrote about things they had avoided talking about benefited most. For it's not so much the severity of the trauma that affects your health, but how you live with it from day to day. Another tribute to what writing can do for you. And during this week, that's really what I want you to do. I want you to get a pad of paper and a pencil. Start writing about the things that are affecting you in your life. What are those areas? What are those concerns you have? What is it that's not working in your life? What would you like to change? Now, there are many persons I know that don't want to look back. They say, what's the use? Why bother? Why bring up that pain again? Why dig? Why don't you just shut the door and go forward? Many people ask that. Many people question the value of looking back. But again, I'm reminded that in treatment centers, they say, if you don't treat, you repeat. And so the more you can see, the more you can undo and change, so you don't in the future have to keep having the same experiences over and over. There's some pain often in looking back, but there's more pain in living your life and never looking back. There might be guilt. The kind of guilt you feel when you know your parents did the best that they possibly could, and yet you're going to write and say they did this, that, and the other thing. I'm reminded of the article that was written about Mike Wickett, and I hope you saw it in the news. It was a beautiful Sunday spread they did on him in the feature magazine. And in there, he said, I'd do anything to keep from hurting my family. That's not the purpose. I talk about it. See, it wasn't so much what happened, but my response to what happened that held me back. So that's what we're going to look at. We're not going to look so much to judge or to criticize or to blame. We're going to look back to see how it's affected us. What can we do to change it? Sometimes, we don't want to look back because there's some shame. Sometimes we don't want to feel the rejection again. But again, if you can look back, you can discover so much. You can see where your present attitudes came from. You can see what you really believe. Not what you think you believe, but what you really believe about yourself and your life. And you can also see a pattern of reactions in situations. Nikki McWhorter from the Free Press just the other day wrote, there's a child inside of us who threatens to run amok. And then she goes on to say, we all have multiple personalities, well, at least two, for sure. That's the adult and the child. The adult is responsible, reasonable, capable, and fully grown. And then there's sometimes the delightful, sometimes aggravating, but always demanding child who still abides in his or her corner of our mind for all of our lives. This idea of there being two of us, the child that just keeps jumping out and acting out, and the adult, it's everywhere. Today seems to be a period of time in life where this idea of getting in touch with the child in us is spoken about, written about over and over, because it really is a reality, an insight that people are having that they can change. Sometimes we don't like to look back because people would not agree with what we saw back there. Let's face it, they would hear our version and they'd say, that's not how it was. Well, there was a cartoon the other day in the paper, And it was so true to how we have all lived our lives. The mother was going shopping, and she took along her little boy. He had to be all of 3 years old, and her mother. And as she got out of the car, she said, "You two wait here for me." And Granny slipped over into the driver's seat so he wouldn't get behind the wheel, and immediately she fell asleep. In the meantime, the little boy bounced up and down on the front seat, flipped over into the back seat, ran up and down the back seat, looked out the window with his little nose stuck against the window, played on the back window, jumped back in the front, back in the back, until he was worn out. And he sat in the back seat with these big droopy circles under his eyes, tired out, getting dark outside, and all of a sudden the door opened. And Granny opened her eyes and said, "Well, you're back already." And the little boy said, "Mama, where have you been?" Two people in the same car, same experience, but both had a different experience. 10 years, 20 years later, if they talked about that shopping trip, would they have the same story? Two totally different stories. And that's how we've lived our life. I have a version of how I saw my life. I perceived it through my eyes, through my experience. Now, I could line up all my family members, and I have 5 brothers. I bet we'd all do a different personal inventory. Every one of us have a perception. What's important is not who's right or wrong, because nobody's right or wrong. We're all right, in the sense that it was our perception of how things were, how things affected us personally. And so therefore, I've lived out my life based on how I felt about how it was. And that's what I need to deal with. I need to deal with how I saw it, because that's how it affected me. And I look back and I think, you know, what would they think? How would they feel? Would they be, should I forgive for some of the things that went on that I feel were injustices to me? And I guess I have to look. I have one of my sons sitting here, and my sons are 23, 22, and 18, certainly adult young men by now. And the 3 of them could tell me their version of how living with me has been. And I can tell you I've made some mistakes. And I've sat down with every one of them and said that to them. You know, it hasn't been all smooth and easy. And there are some things you'll want to change as you grow up. Take the good. Change what doesn't fit. It's okay. But I do not want 20 years from now to still be hearing about, if only, why didn't you do it this way, that way? I could never forgive her. Remember when we didn't have any money? Remember all those times when my friends didn't, we didn't? I would not want to hear that in 20 years. If I don't, why would I do that to somebody else? And so as we look back again, I'm going to stress, no judgment, no criticism, no blame, no guilt. We're going to be like reporters. A reporter just looking at what we saw and reporting the facts. That's all we need, just the facts. After we've looked, and all of you will be doing this week, after you've looked at your lives, when you've looked at your childhood, where you've been, how you got to be who you are today, we're going to take a more in-depth look, and that will start next week. When we come in, we're going to be looking at what happened to us because of what went on. What were our reactions? That's what we're dealing with. What were our reactions to the past? Because it's our reactions that are holding us back in life today. And that's when we really begin to get into the concept of a 12-step program of recovery. Most people will connect it with AA, because that's where it won its fame, its glory, its honor, because many thousands upon thousands of people's lives were dramatically changed through the 12-step program of recovery in AA. So successful was it that now Al-Anon, Adult Children of Alcoholics, Overeaters Anonymous, Cancer Anonymous, Oh, Cocaine Anonymous, all of your support groups are using the 12-step program of recovery. And again, if you look at the first 3 steps, you will hear something. What you'll hear is our own mastermind steps incorporated in. I admit that I'm powerless to improve my life and I need help. I come to believe that there is available within me a creative intelligence and power that can completely change my life. And I make a decision to place myself completely under God's direction and guidance and become willing to be changed. And I get honest with myself as never before and take an inventory of my mistaken judgments and negative emotional responses. That is the program we will work, of honestly looking at ourselves. And if we pull any skeletons out of the closet, so what? Bernard Shaw said, if you can't get rid of the skeletons in the closet, at least make them dance. And that's what we'll do. We'll make our lives come alive. We'll dance. If you don't take a personal inventory, most people don't, let's face it. But what about Kmart? What about General Motors? What if they never took an inventory? Could they be successful? Or would they have utter chaos? And what if they began an inventory and then stopped it and went on vacation and came back and continued and then decided to open the doors to sell a few more things and then shut the doors and continued again? What kind of inventory would they be taking? And yet we do that with our lives. We really don't take our lives and set aside a period of time to say, this is it. This is for me. I'm going to take this time, and I'm going to really take an in-depth look and see what I'm all about. Where I've been, where I am, and where I'm going. And I invite you right now to make that decision, to do that. Together we'll do that. Joseph Kirsch, do you remember him? He was here. He is the doctor who has been responsible most for Betty Ford's treatment. He also developed the recovery program in the Navy. He had an article in the paper that quoted Fulton Oursler, a journalist in Liberty magazine in 1940, and he was asked to repeat it. And he writes, as a journalist, it has been my privilege to meet many people who are considered charming. I number among my friends stars and lesser lights on stage and cinema. Writers are my daily diet. I know ladies and gentlemen of both political parties. I have been entertained in the White House. I've broken bread with kings, ambassadors, ministers, and I say I would prefer an evening with my AA friends to any person I have ever indicated. Do you know who these AA people are? They're people who work the program. You see, when we get together in my smaller class, we just talk about all kinds of intimate, cozy little things, and we kind of expand on ideas as people ask questions, but I feel this is so worth talking about because some of you might say, well, I'm not AA. I'm not Al-Anon. Well, I'm not AA either. That doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is a 12-step program of recovery, and Fulton Oursler is talking about people who have been involved in a process of change and growth. A recovery program. Not necessarily that they're AA, because those of you who are, you've had 2 things to deal with. You've had to stop your drinking. People with drug addictions have had to stop drugs. That's one part of the problem. But when they were finished, that didn't change their lives. That stopped their addiction. The other part of their program was to get involved in a program of spiritual growth, personal inventory, and getting out into their lives and sharing what they've learned with others. That's what really changes the person. I'm sure some of you know somebody who just flat out quit drinking And you didn't see any change at all. That's true. There are those. Because that isn't the program to quit drinking. The program is to really work the program. So Dr. Persh refers to us as normies. We are people who didn't have the AA program. And he said, like Oursler, I too am a normie. The AA's word for non-alcoholic. Having met literally thousands of AAs in my life, I have often seen the qualities he describes, especially in those who really work the program. They become like that because they have to face and resolve personal attitudes on a daily, ongoing basis. Attitudes that we normies never even have to address, let alone resolve. That's the point where we will differ. Because at the Church of today, we do use the 12-step program of recovery throughout the church. It's the undercurrent. It is what makes our church different than other churches. Any one of you can get on a plane this moment, go to any other church across America, and I defy you to see a group like this coming in to learn about personal inventory, changing old patterns of reactions in your life. What makes this church as great as it is, and it is great, is that people come here and really change. They really do something with their lives. They progress, they grow, they change. And they have an openness to learn new ideas. Dr. Wayne Dyer, do you know he asks to come back here and speak? He loves you. He said anywhere in this country he has never seen a group of people like you who are so alive. You are living your lives. W. Clement Stone, Ron and I took him to the airport. He could not stop talking about what he felt in this place. Dr. Norman Vincent Peale and his wife, as we drove to the airport, they could not get over what was happening with you people. And he is the father of positive thinking. Something exciting is going on here. And that something is your willingness to come here to learn, to change, to dare, to step out of your little prison, your little area of life that you have lived in, and to make more of yourselves. Recently, a small group of us heard a Hawaiian kahuna. That's a master teacher from Hawaii. And his name was Dr. Nepal. Now, Dr. Nepal said that in Hawaii, they were raised to never ask why. Their forefathers said, you don't ask why. What difference? It just is. Whatever it is, just is. What you ask is, what do I do? Where do I go from here? And then he said, my life is like an open book. I am at peace with myself. You can take this book and you can open it to any page. You can't hurt me. You can't shame me. I don't feel any guilt. Open the book and look. My life is an open book. When you are really at peace with yourself, with who you are, with where you've been, with where you're going, the outside people, the outside circumstances cannot touch you. It's when we feel the shame, the guilt, the blame, the rejection, the resentment. That's when we have the cover. That's when we don't want anybody to get too close. They might see what's going on inside of us. But if we can take our life and we could put it out in the pages of our book and say, yes, that's right. I made mistakes. It's true. I hope I've learned from it. I'm sure I have. Well, today, yes, I'm living today the best I can. Tomorrow, you can be guaranteed tomorrow I will probably make more mistakes. Because as long as I'm on this earth, I'm going to make mistakes. The mistake is to stay down and never try again. To be a winner in life, you get up and you keep on trying. You don't stay down. And last night, as I was thinking about Dr. Nepal and the things he had said to us that evening and how much he impressed me with the example of his life being an open book, no secrets, nothing to hide, I thought, I remember a book, and I looked on our shelf, and it was still there before I ever knew anything about positive thinking, anything about growth and change. I was alone browsing through a bookstore, and the title of this book caught my eye, and it was, If You Really Knew Me, Would You Still Like Me? If you really knew me, would you still like me? And it's all marked up inside as I went through it, because that was my book of life. I was so afraid you would know, that if you got too close to me, you would see what was really going on, how I really felt. You would see my insecurities. You wouldn't like me. You would see my fears, and you would look down on me. If you looked into my eyes, you would see the hurt, and so I would look away and stand away if you really knew me. Today, I want to live my life like Dr. Nepal. I want to say, here it is. Yeah, I've made mistakes. It's not my last. I'm sure I'm going to make some more. But, isn't living like that living as Jesus taught us to live? When he said, come, follow me, do as I do. Unconditional love, unconditional forgiveness. Isn't that what we're striving for? Isn't that the purpose in life? Isn't that what life is all about? Doesn't that give meaning to our life? That's what my life will be, an open book. If I am at peace with my past, with my mistakes, with my life today as it is, the good and the not so good, we all have challenges. Nobody who stands here. Standing up here doesn't mean that we're above challenges in our lives. We handle them and deal with them just like you do. And tomorrow, if I stop making mistakes, it means I've stopped doing anything new, doing anything different. Stop trying. And life is too short. Life is too short to just stop and live safe in my own little prison. I've been there too long. I want out. What about you? What do you want? Tonight, when you came, you had some ideas about why you were here, what you thought you would hear. Now, I hope you've got some other ideas to think about. I hope you go home and really give some thought to your life. Where have you been? How's it been? Where are you going? Where would you like to go? For those of you who have come back over and over again, remember the poem that we finished our class off with, The Magic Onion? I'd like to end with that for all of us tonight because it really is the story of you and I. It's called The Magic Onion. See, I'm a magic onion. Well, don't laugh. You're an onion too. There's layers and layers and layers of me I'll never get down through. But I just try to peel myself to see what I'm all about. And whenever any insight comes, I laugh and dance and shout. Now, I'm not implying that self-search is such fun. Sometimes I scare myself to death. I want to hide and run. And when I began to see, to understand what others plainly see, I wonder how God dares to love the stinking mess of me. If you gave me a crystal ball, I'd throw it far away. I only have the strength to bear the layer of today. Am I glad I'm an onion? Well, I used to be a rock. Nothing moved or breathed inside. I was all locked and blocked. Now that I'm an onion, although I cry, I jive. And I hope to be a peeling until I'm 95. All you other onions who've never made a strip, I'm not going to sugarcoat your first colossal rip. Although you'll feel pulled inside out, it won't break your heart, for it may truly save your life and give you a brand new start. So when you find a sponsor who's wise and strong and kind, go to her and open up the onion of your mind. And you will soon discover how the magic works for you. As the layers peel away, your sweetness will come through. For all us magic onions just stink in self-defense. Underneath lies hearts of gold, courage, and common sense. And we can all be sponsors of different sorts and kinds who help each other to open up the onions of our mind. Thank you.